Greetings 94th, this is Speaker 1-2 with our newest instructional video here. Got a little bit of feedback on the stall spin recovery video. Sounds like it went pretty well, and my buddy in the squadron got it, and a couple other people talking about other possible instructional videos in which we could start showing things like formation flying and so on. We'll get to later. This is the first of those. It's the military overhead pattern for takeoffs and landings, basically, so traffic patterns at an airport. Basically, this is just gee whiz stuff that you really don't need to know, but it's kind of fun to play with and see how it works. And this is what we do in the military in terms of our cleared airfields that are able to do this. And these are some of the procedures that we do. So first off, we're starting with ground school, essentially. This will be the bare bones basics. I'll try to portray to you using this diagram here some of the finer points of the upwind, close turn, downwind, basically finding where you are in the pattern and what some things to do. And then the next part of this video is I'm going to be showing you in-game basically what we just talked about. I'm going to be using the BF-109, using just the test area, just screw around in basically. But this is for us to use as a squadron, just because we want to. It does make landings and takeoffs a lot more efficient. But basically just gee whiz, aviation nerd type of stuff, as well as just good information to know. Alright, so I guess basically we'll start with this diagram here. I pulled it from my flight school, the very first one I ever went to. It's the initial flight screening program that the Air Force puts on, so if you ever think you want to become a pilot, that's where they all go first. So this is a lot of information here. You're not going to need all this information. This is for a very specific airframe with very specific rules that dictate very specific, operations at that airfield. Well, that's a lot of stuff. I'm basically using it to show you a picture of what it's all supposed to look like. Anyway, we'll start with the basics. So when you take off, when you're over the runway, usually it's called upwind. It's called the upwind portion of the traffic pattern because you're taking off into the wind. Gives you a little bit of that extra lift so you can get off the ground. Essentially, after you take off, you're going to be cleaning up the airframe. So your flaps and your gear, you're going to be retracting that to get your aircraft to the most stable position. After you level off, or you start leveling off, and with your cruise setting, in-game I use 80% thrust. Actually, a lot of aircraft use about 80% thrust as their main cruise. It's efficient and still gets you there pretty quick. But anyway, right at the tip there, it says at the top the departure turnout or the turn closed. Yeah, that's basically at that point there where you're going to come into the downwind side. So leaving your throttle 80%, you're going to go ahead and do your nice leisurely turn and just come around into the downwind portion. If you do this right, and I'll actually show you in the cockpit as well, it's a technique that I learned at the flight school. Basically in the cockpit, it varies with each airframe in each aircraft, but yeah, there's a certain point on the wings, because you're going to have, say, your right wing over the airstrip, and it's going to be shown, while you're looking outside your aircraft, it's like right below, 3/4 of the wing or something. And so I'll try to point that out in the game because that'll help dictate your distance. So it says here the half nautical mile spacing between the downwind and the upwind side. Keeps that spacing so people are safe, so you're not flying the same altitude as everybody else in different directions. Anyway, I'll show you that in game. It doesn't work as well as I'd like it to, but it's basically a visual. It'll be like, oh, okay, that's what people do. Anyway, after you execute your close turn, you're going to be doing your downwind. Basically, you're going to be keeping your 80% thrust and continue on as you were. Essentially, we're going to close the pattern by doing an approach to landing. So basically, anywhere on your downwind leg here is where you can start configuring the aircraft for landing. Other aircraft would either use that closed turn to leave the area and go fly somewhere else, or use that closed turn, as we just talked about, to enter downwind to land. So I mean, you do your set up for your downwind, you'd have your throttle back, you're going to put your gear and your flaps out, and then you're going to continue trucking on down to this funny little angle here called the perch. The perch is about 30 to 45 degrees behind you looking back. It's a lot easier to do in a real airplane than it is to do in the game. I have a lot of problems with that. But it's from your point there to the basically the approach end of the runway, and I mean the approach end by approaching to land there. So basically, you're going to be at that point there. That's your basic point in which you're going to go ahead. You're going to throttle back, and then you're going to pitch down and start doing your nice leisurely turn and your base turn, essentially, to be on final approach. About where you roll out, you're going to be quarter mile, half mile, basically from the edge of the runway. It's called final approach, and you're either going to have the throttle way back or up a little bit, determining on where you happen to be, to basically have your approach out nice. Now, what we do in aviation anyway, and it depends on the airframe, and etc., etc., you're going to aim to land anyway at the threshold, the runway threshold, so the very, very first part of the pavement there. And I'll demonstrate a little bit of that too, hopefully in the video. It's all about aim point and airspeed. Your aim point being where the aircraft is actually flying, and then your airspeed, and which varies from airframe to airframe, which is hard to do in War Thunder. And you're going to maintain that glide until you round out here, and then flare, and then do your touchdown in the first 1,000 feet of the runway to land. So that's your basic traffic pattern from the upwind, the close, the downwind, perch, and the final approach. Now that's not all. The overhead pattern is designed so that military aircraft, especially anyway, or the way we use it, can land and take off in the same time at the same airfield. So you're not waiting for folks, to, basically traffic conflicts in the traffic pattern, trying to get more folks up. There's going to be altitude differential basically to keep people safe. So I just talked about the takeoff portion. Essentially, if you're already in the air and you want to land somewhere, you're going to approach from the final approach end. Actually, you're going to approach from what they call initial. Initial's about, and I'll describe it in game actually, it's about 800 feet up. And I'll explain that to you here in a minute as well. But you're basically flying over the people who are on final approach. So basically, while they're at a lower altitude and they're on their final approach, you're going to be about, I want to say, 500 feet above them over the airfield, with a total of 800 feet above the ground. So you're going to be trucking along in initial. You're going to be at your 80% throttle, because that's your basic cruise. And you're going to come over to the runway threshold of the approach end, and then you come to this place called the brake zone. The brake zone, which is usually the first 2,000 feet or so of the runway, at least in this example. In game, I usually truck around through midfield, and then I do my turn, which we're about to call the brake, or the brake turn. This basically just puts you on downwind. So instead of doing the entire close turn and everything, you're basically doing an early close turn. Because if you didn't, there's people taking off of the runway ahead of you, and they might actually climb into you and not be able to see you. So basically, if you see this is two actions. These are people taking off, doing their close turn, coming to the downwind, and trying to land, basically what you're going to do. And then you coming in on initial, you want to land, and you're higher than everybody else. So you're just going to fly over the brake zone, you're going to brake, and then come onto the downwind automatically. So basically, I truck into about midfield of the airfield I'm trying to land at, and then I do my brake turn. It's kind of hard to judge. It's a lot harder to do in the game actually than it is in a real airplane. Funny how that is. But anyway, the brake turn consists of you going at your cruising speed, your 80% throttle, and then what I do is I throttle all the way down. I pretty much throttle to idle. I'm going to idle, and then I'm going to do my nice leisurely turn, in this case to the right, to come on to downwind. So basically, you're trying to bleed off all that airspeed that you have, because you're, at least in the BF-109, which I'll show you, you're at about 230 miles an hour already. You don't want to land like that. It's way too fast. So I'm using that turn to bleed off all the airspeed. So then once I'm done, I'm on downwind, I throttle up a little bit. I can configure the aircraft with my flaps and my gear. And then by the time I'm about done, I should be at the perch, or very close to the perch. So yeah, at that point I would have my throttle up again a little bit, so because when you're configured, you're going to cause more drag, which means your nose is going to want to come down, and you need more power to keep the airplane in the air. All the while, you're trying to maintain the traffic pattern altitude, which I'll also describe in a minute. Basically, you're going to hold your altitude until you get to the perch, in which you're going to do your nice leisurely turn to the right and start your descent with your throttle back a little bit, and you're going to come down to the final approach like you would in the full pattern. And then you're going to get on your half nautical mile final approach at aim point airspeed until you're lined up with the runway, and land, do touch and go, whatever it is you want to do, rinse, repeat, essentially. So coming in on initial means you're already in the air already. You just want to land and enter the traffic pattern. It's basically just a way for you to enter the traffic pattern. And then coming in, you do your brake turn, come onto the downwind side. Now this funny thing over here, up on the right hand side here, it says 45 to entry, the big blue box. That's how people enter civilian traffic patterns, is you always have to enter 45 degrees to downwind, or at least pretty close. Most civilian airports do not use initial or the brake zone. A lot of air traffic controls actually know what it is, but the local procedures might not allow for it, or other basic things. Anyway, that is your short and sweet version of the overhead traffic pattern, especially that the military uses specifically. Also, I'll go into two things here. There's actually 3 different altitudes you guys are going to need to know. Not really need to know, but it's nice to know. First is AGL. It's above ground level. So above ground level, this comes into play basically you over terrain, and it can change with the terrain. You might be 1,000 feet the entire time, and you come over a field. Field's only like 5 feet or something. Whereas if you're flying over a mountain at the same altitude, your altitude's going to change with every cliff. So it's terrain based. MSL, mean sea level, is the aviation standard. Actually, both of these are the aviation standard, but altimeters, so your measurement of altitude in the airplane, is in MSL. It's basically a barometric pressure sensor. Every plane's got one. If you notice in the cockpit view of War Thunder, you can pick it up. That's displayed in MSL. So sea level, how high you are from sea level. Airfields will usually be dictated in how high they are above sea level. Actually, War Thunder is like this too. All the altitudes in the game are MSL. Very standard, so that makes things really easy. In the demonstration I'll show you, the German airfield is at 202 feet MSL. So that is where you are already on the ground. That's good to know, because you'll need to know MSL, what the traffic pattern altitude is. The traffic pattern altitude, it varies from airport to airport. In our example, our traffic pattern altitude will be 800 feet above that. So basically, your traffic pattern altitude is going to be 1,000 feet MSL. But in reality, you are 800 feet off of the ground. Math and blah blah blah, yeah, I know, numbers suck. But this is how it's usually done in the real world. Actually, it's normally how it's done. This is standard in the real world. So I will demonstrate a little bit of this with the BF-109, and we'll go into basically just what I talked about. Sorry for the long ground school, but if I wanted to make this work, I had to do a little bit of instruction here to help you guys understand what I'm talking about. So basically that's it for this Sesame Street version of overhead pattern.